For this episode of Coffee with Closers, I'm sitting down with Adam Birnbaum. Adam is an experienced operator and an entrepreneurial leader in B2B SaaS and tech space. He currently serves as the CEO of Buildout, a premier commercial real estate and broker platform. Adam earned his MBA from the Wharton School of Business and has a BS from Northwestern University. He is a disruptive technology enthusiast and an avid musician. Stay tuned for my conversation with Adam, where he shares practical advice on building a strong company culture and obtaining operational excellence in a competitive marketplace.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Coffee with Closers, where business leaders share insights on how to build businesses from the ground up and best practices for innovating in their industry.
Hey Adam, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Glad to be on the show.
Yeah, most certainly. Well, obviously you have an extremely successful background. You've had a BS from Northwestern. You have an MBA from Wharton School. You've been in the tech front in the Chicago community for a very long time. Been part of some of the very fast-growing tech companies such as Hirology, most notably now Buildout, for which you are actually also the interim CEO. So you've accomplished a lot in such a short time span. So for all the things you've accomplished, what would you say you're most proud of?
I think that the thing that I'm most proud of is actually not a professional thing specifically. It has to do with a friend of mine in 2012 who passed away at the age of 30 from cancer. And just the nicest guy, lived with his heart, was just generous with his time, just the kind of person who you talked with and you were like, this is just a really good person. Group of friends of mine and I were at his funeral and decided that we didn't want this to be the last time that we thought of him. And long story short, myself and a couple of friends ended up doing a big fundraiser in his name and raised a bunch of money that we then used to build a memorial in his hometown that is still around to this day. And I get texts and emails throughout the year, every year, ever since then, from people who go to the site, which is just a beautiful place in nature that has a plaque with his story on it. And just the idea of being able to commemorate somebody's memory, have an impact, do something that many, many years later is still keeping his memory alive was just a really powerful experience. So I don't know if that's exactly what you're going for, but that's something that I'm very proud of.
Yeah, and oftentimes, I think those are things that we probably don't put on our LinkedIn profile, but those are the kind of stuff that really means to people's lives, right? Helping someone's legacy and to make that more memorable, and things that you do that may live past you in some day as well. So that's an interesting story. What's the biggest lesson you learned, obviously being part of the tech community in Chicago? You were also an advisor at tech community in Chicagoland area. What are some of the biggest lessons you learned working at Hirology or at Buildout or any of these fast-growing SaaS companies?
So the companies, those companies that are at that stage of growth are moving quickly. And so I think it's the ability to be adaptive and to be able to reinvent yourself and help others reinvent themselves over the time that you're at a company. Because, if you think about it, a company that is, let's say, a 30-person company runs very differently than a 60-person company, works very differently than a 100-person company, which is where we're at Buildout now. And there's different ways that you communicate. There's different ways that you think about processes. In a slower growing company, there's a lot more time to evolve from one type of company to the next in terms of how big that company is and what the size is. And when you're at a fast growing company, you're moving through those phases so much more quickly that it's really important to be adaptive. And so the other part of that then is communication, right? You need to have an attitude yourself, and ideally a culture that you work within where people can have real candid conversations with each other, because in that sort of an environment, there's going to be friction that is going to be happening as the gears of that company spin and move and propel you forward. And so you need to really be able to to have open, honest, direct conversations with other people about what's working, what's not working, how you can improve, where you might need to change processes, whether your strategy is correct or needs changes. Those pieces, I think, are the most important things that come to mind.
Yeah, which kind of actually segue into some of the other questions that I wanted to ask you, because obviously you, as we talked today, you were the interim CEO of Buildout. You just went through an acquisition. And when you come into that role as a new leader, right, taking on that leadership role, especially when a company goes through such a transition, right, the employees are starting to worry, especially at the size that you're at, right? Hey, what kind of changes are happening? Is my job secure? All of those things might be coming up. So how are you as a leader now trying to make sure that the company culture stays intact and that continue to keep that vision that you had for the organization, continue to thrive in that area?
Great question. Yeah, it is really important when you're going through an acquisition like what we just went through to think about, how are you going to keep the culture intact and how are you going to really drive the things that make the company work and successful. So in terms of the instability, there's that comes up and people hear things from their friends or read things in the paper about what happens with acquisitions. And the reality is that every acquisition is different. And I think that the way to help people feel comfortable with the change that's going, first of all, is to hit it on the head and say, yeah, change is happening, but change isn't a bad thing. Change is part of the world. Businesses are always changing. People are always changing. And so you shouldn't be afraid of change. There's opportunity to come through change, and the magic comes when you can figure out what that opportunity is. Transparency is also a really important piece of this, because when people are, wondering what's going to happen to the company, how does this impact me in my role, the more transparent you can be in sharing the information that the questions that that the team is working through, and a timeline for when those decisions are going to be decided can be really helpful, because I think that people understand that sometimes all the answers aren't there, and they appreciate a sense of candidness around where those answers might lead. But I think where folks run into trouble is when there's ambiguity and they don't know when that ambiguity is going to be closed, because then there's no end to the process that you're going through. So being clear about what the process is, what the open questions are, and what the timeline is that you're working through, I think can all really help to keep that culture intact and help stabilize the organization in a way to be looking forward and seeing the opportunities that are coming out of that change.
And I know culture is a term that we often just use every time we're talking about people and the company, right? But what's your perspective on culture, and how do you kind of define it?
I see culture as the attitude and behaviors of the company, of the teams, of the people that are on those teams, how teams work together. And I think can be a real competitive advantage for a company. It can be a force multiplier. It can be a way to reduce risk. Any company, you take a product, you find the right market, you can run a company under any culture. But if you have a culture in play that really works to move a company forward, that helps a company grow instead of inhibiting growth, that can be the difference between succeeding and failing.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of practical measures, obviously at Buildout, you're now operating as a CEO, what kind of practical measures have been taken to make sure that the company culture is growing and you're building upon it?
So we spent some time about a year and a half ago-ish, maybe, around that, documenting our culture for the first time. And when we went through that exercise, it's not that we didn't have a culture, we already did, but it wasn't written down. And if it's not written down, as you start to scale, there's nothing to kind of hold on to. So we put together this culture code that was a documentation of our values and our practices and our principles to get really clear about who we are and what do we stand for, and just importantly, who aren't we and what don't we stand for. So that was a really important artifact. And then it's almost like you get it documented, and then that doesn't matter as much as the way that leadership acts, because at the end of the day, you need to be able to walk the talk. And so I really look to our leadership team to embody and embrace the values that the company has to, in their interactions with each other and in their interactions down with the team. That way we've got things documented, we're modeling what's documented, and we can help when new people start, really bring them into that culture and understand what Buildout is all about.
Yeah, and I think, like you just mentioned, I think when you document it, you solidify it, and it's not, it lived past any one person, right? And it's also, something that you can reference back. I think the first company that I've ever read about having a company culture code was HubSpot. I think they publicized their culture code, and I think people were copying it, and I think they were very proud of getting companies to actually adapt that model. So I'm happy to hear that. So it's one thing to be the founder, leader, visionary of an organization. It's another thing to come into that role when your founder, visionary leaves the company, right? Now you got to carry that mantle and revitalize that vision and still drive the company forward. So what kind of practical measures are you taking as now the interim CEO to make sure that the company vision is still intact and that the company is moving forward? And what sort of initiatives are you taking with regards to that?
Yeah, so moving into the CEO role, very humbled to be doing that. Our former CEO, Vishu, was a fantastic leader, and I've got some big shoes that I'm stepping into. The first thing to understand is that the CEO transition doesn't change the fundamental purpose of the company, our reason for being, which is to become the leading largest commercial real estate software provider. That is sort of table stakes for what Buildout's all about. Similarly, some of our most important cultural values, things like integrity and collaboration amongst the team and providing really great customer service, those things don't change either. So there's a sense of stability that enables within a leadership transfer for our employees and our customers to know that the things that have made Buildout great in the past are going to stay the same. At the same time, coming in as a new leader, it means I come in with my own personality, my own perspective, my own strengths, and there's an opportunity for me to bring those strengths and ideas to the role. So then the question is, what are the best ways to iterate and to move the organization forward? The first thing that I did when I came into the role was I put on my beginner's mindset hat and said, I've been at the company for 2.5 years, but I really want to look at the company with a fresh perspective as if I'm a new CEO coming in. And I opened up my calendar and I said, whoever wants to talk to me within the company, I'd love to hear from you, both as a chance to connect with all of the individuals, but also to understand from their perspective, what are those things that we're doing really well that make us competitive, that are great about our culture, and importantly also, where are those areas that we have to improve, and what are you seeing within your role with the way that we work with our customers, with our products. And through those discussions, I was just able to get a wealth of knowledge that it makes my job as a leader easy, because then I can have a lot of information to process, organize, think about, and then pull together a plan and say, okay, what are the different things that we're going to do now to build on what's made us great, but also accelerate and drive us to that next level.
Which brings me to my question about organizations and systems and processes, because obviously you're operations director and you've also were the chief operating officer at Buildout, and you've held that role in multiple different organizations as well. So from that perspective, and having worked in that operation functions before, what kind of practical things can organizations do to make, to excel in operation, right? Like how to really have that operational excellence within those organizations, especially to help them to scale and grow?
Yeah, great question. And a good question to ask, especially for the point that we're at right now, because as we cross that 100 employee threshold, the operations of the company have always been important, but are even more important now to really maximize our growth. And, it really gets down to the operational fundamentals, which is your systems, processes, and people. So you're making sure, one, that you've got the right people in the right roles, you've got the right organizational structure that supports your strategy. You've got the right recruiting, onboarding, and growth plans for the employees at the company. That's key. If you don't have your human capital assets, the people at your company performing to the best of their ability in the right roles, you're not going to go in the right direction. Second of all, processes. So, really getting tight on defining what are the things that your teams are doing, writing those things down, and then setting up feedback loops to be able to tell when you're on track, when you're off track. And if you're off track, getting that feedback to be able to improve incrementally, make that process better and better over time, which is where your metrics come into place. Of course, you need the metrics to be able to measure your processes, to be able to tell if they're on track or not. And then systems. When companies are first getting built, there's often you get a point system here, you get a point system there, and before you know, you've got 50 plus systems that are being used across the company, which is great for moving quickly. But as you start to grow and you really want to scale, it can start to become a hindrance because it can build on and exacerbate the organizational silos that can start to happen as a company gets bigger. So system consolidation, bringing things into single systems or system integrations start to become really important so that anybody in their role, no matter what they do, they've got a problem that they're trying to solve. They can access the right information, be able to input the right information to be able to move the business forward. Those three foundational pieces in place and a good strategy that wraps underneath, and then a good vision that wraps over that strategy, those things all together can work in concert to help a company grow and scale.
And especially as every level of that organization, every leader has someone else reporting to them, and there are core KPIs and things of that nature. But from your perspective, especially have worked in the operation function in so many different organizations, are there certain scorecards and things that you use to really check the pulse of the organization and how well each of the departments under you is performing?
I wouldn't say that there's a one-size-fits-all. So for smaller businesses, I'm a big fan of the entrepreneurial operating system, which defines a scorecard in a very particular way. We have our own scorecard as well, but the reason I say there's no one-size-fits-all is because I think where people sometimes misstep in terms of metrics is they go on a website or they talk to another business and they hear about the metrics that another business is using or what the best practices are, and they say, that's what I'm going to measure here. Mm-hmm. But that's not measuring necessarily what's important. The actual way that you want to set up a scorecard, and the way that we've done so at Buildout, is not to start with what's the metric that I want to measure. It's what is the outcome that I'm trying to get to? What is my strategy? What does success look like? And then once you've defined success, and once you know what your strategy is, and you've really clearly defined what success looks like, then it's what are the metrics that I can use to tell if I'm successfully executing against my strategy and whether I'm successfully going to get to the goals that I'm trying to get to. Mm-hmm. That sort of a framework gets you much more in tune with what the metrics are that are actually going to be important, that are going to tell you where you're going. So that's like big point number one, and probably the most important point. The second thing that I want to talk about related to scorecard that we're doing at Buildout that I think is really important is a concept called pairing metrics. When I say pair, you think of a pair as two, right? And when it comes to metrics, the idea is if you're looking at speed, then you might want to also look at quality. If you're looking at your top line revenue, you also might want to look at profitability. So it's this idea that if you ever take one metric in isolation and you optimize for it, there might be something else that you're completely messing up in the business. So you really want to think about how your metrics complement each other to tell you what the bigger picture is, so that you can ultimately use it to make good decisions about the business.
Yeah, and I know from based on your LinkedIn profile, I saw you also had some senior sales roles at organizations, and I think one of the organizations had over 50,000 sales rep. And you were managing some of the areas there. So from your experience, having worked in organizations, the sales functions, operations, and now as the CEO role, how has your approach on marketing and sales evolved?
Great question. I think you're talking about my time at Medtronic. And at that point, there were 2,000 people in the sales organization, so not 50,000.
Okay. The company was, I think, 50,000, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yes, yeah. That's right. So, yeah, it was a really interesting role, and I was not holding the bag. That was a sales strategy role. But in that role, I was able to see every aspect of what's required to make a sales team effective, efficient. I worked on culture, I worked on metrics, I worked on onboarding and training, sales enablement activities. I work directly with district managers talking about deals. So it was a very wide breadth of experience there. And what I realized in going through that process that's really influenced the way that I see sales and marketing is two big things. One is that you really need to understand the individual motivations of the people on your team. And that's, I think, especially important for sales. If you want to get a really good sales machine, is understanding, the view from the sales rep's perspective and what they're looking for, what's going to help make them successful. And then on the other end of the spectrum, outside of your walls of the business, understanding what are the needs and the pain points of your customer. And so it's sort of this, needs and pain points of your customer, needs and pain points of your sales team. As a leader now, I think about both, because both are important. To some extent, your job as CEO, you're selling to your customers, but there's also sort of a sales aspect internally to the company as well, right? You've got a vision and you're needing to persuade your company that this is the right vision and this is the right strategy. And, we want to use the tools in this way because it's going to lead to this outcome. So really, I think understanding the motivators and then being able to bring your tools and your tactics to play to address what those core motivators are, whether it's your internal customers, your sales team, your marketing team, or your external customers that you're selling to. Those pieces are all critical.
Yeah, which brings me to a question about that sales rep, right? Because they have their own motivation of why they're in that function, right? And then also there are things that they have to still do as their job to make sure that the organization is moving ahead and that they're meeting the responsibilities, whether it be sales quotas and things like that. But how do you ensure that the reps that you have, right, is doing the right things, maybe filling up the data inside the CRM system and following the steps in the sales process to move the deals further and whatever all those things are? How do you motivate the reps to be able to do those things? Because some of those things are just routine tasks that are not very exciting for sales reps, as much as they enjoy being in front of people to do the sales.
Yeah, for sure. And I've in my career, I've met with a variety of different types of sales reps. Some of them really love the structure and the process. Some of them hate it. And one, perspective isn't right or wrong, but you do need to be able to work with the folks who don't necessarily see the value or need, and they kind of see it as busy work. I think the thing that's really important there is to understand the WIFI of what you're doing. WIFI, W-I-I-F-Y, what's in it for you. So when you're working with a rep and you're asking them to enter in some data into Salesforce or complete some process or type up notes, you really need to help them understand not just what's in it for the organization, but what's in it for you. How is it going to help them be successful? And sometimes if you say, typing in your notes is going to help us create better products, there's not a tight enough bridge there. They don't understand how to go from step A to step E. So what you need to say is, if you put in your notes, then this team is going to be able to review it. And every month it informs our product roadmap. And our product roadmap is what allows us to make improvements to the product. So sometimes just taking a couple of extra steps to help really move people from what they see on their end, which is busy work, to what leadership sees on the other side, which is, profitability, productivity, etc. You need to really bridge the gap. I find that you can really only do that when you have a conversation with the team and understand where there might be a disconnect happening in that communication thread, to be able to paint the whole picture for them to see the WIFI and understand why they should do it, how it's going to help them hit quota, how it's going to help them, achieve the goals that they're trying to hit.
Yeah, and I think it's almost like the why and the how, right? Because I think oftentimes we just teach them the how to go do all the updates inside the CRM, but not necessarily give them a reason behind why we are asking them to do that. One, yeah, it's going to help you meet your quota faster because you're going to be able to track your sales pipeline and make sure that you are working the right deals. And the other thing is, that insight is going to help our organization to drive the product future or whatever the other improvements we want to make as a company. So that's a great insight there. So let's talk a little bit about yourself. Obviously, there's got to be some drivers that keeps Adam moving, right? What's kind of your core why? What keeps you motivated?
My core why is becoming the best that I can be. It's meeting my, biggest potential for myself. And that I think is a very personal process for each person. And what I've found throughout my career is each time I feel like I'm starting to hit a ceiling, I realize that that's the floor for where I need to go next. And so the idea of, reaching your ultimate potential combined with a beginner's mindset, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. I'm running a race that doesn't have a finish line, gets me really excited, because it's the idea of unlimited possibilities. It's the idea of unlimited growth. It's the idea that, no matter how far I go, I can always go further. As I've gone through my career, a second piece that started to go alongside that's gotten really important to me in the last 5+ years has been helping other people go on that journey. So working with individuals, with a team, with an organization, and helping them understand that there is no ceiling, and that every ceiling is a new floor, and that, you can go further than you think you can if you have the right mindset and the right attitude, has been really engaging and enjoying for me, just to see how, when you believe in somebody else, what they can accomplish. Just blows my mind.
Yeah, and I think, everybody said believe in yourself, and, you have a lot of great potentials, but how do you train yourself practically to have such mindset? Are there any specific tactics that you leverage?
It's a great question. I think that when it comes to your mindset and really wanting to, embrace that point of confidence, it's got to come from inside. And your question around the why is part of it. I think for you to, really want to push and drive and sort of, get to that next step, and then get to that next step, and get to that next step, you need to have a really important why. There needs to be a driver there. And I think, earlier on in my career, I read a lot, and I still read a lot. I love reading. I think it's a great point towards development. But when I used to read, it was around, well, what is everybody else doing that I'm missing? Like, what can I gain from other people that's going to help me? And I've become much more introspective in the later part of my career, where I want to learn from other people, but really I'm on a the journey is inside of me. Mm-hmm. And it's not, and that's for everybody. Everybody's journey is inside of themselves. I think that the more that you can tap into who you are, that helps. And so, just to get much more practical, because you asked, things that have been really helpful to me, meditation has been really helpful. Journaling, just open journaling about my thoughts, my dreams, my fears, my emotions, has been really helpful to me. Getting people to challenge me, asking for feedback, and really seeking to understand that feedback from a non-defensive posture where there might be a learning opportunity. That's been really important to me. Those are some of the more tactical things, but there is certainly a bit of, non-analytical, mushy work that needs to be done that comes from inside of you and really understanding who you are.
Yeah, and I think you were talking earlier about, even when you came into that CEO role, not coming to it with, hey, I have 2 years of experience in this company, but just saying, hey, I'm a newbie. What can I learn and how can I improve? I think that always learning attitude is what keeps you, sharp. Not ever feel like you arrived, because I think that only plateaus your ability to grow further. Are there any productivity hacks? I'm sure you're a busy guy, and you, especially being in the operations world, I'm sure you have some hacks there. Are there any practical recommendations that you have for other entrepreneurs in terms of how they can be better productive?
Yeah. One thing that I've started to do in the last 3 to 6 months or so is I have a timer. Mm-hmm. And when I'm going through my email, I will set a timer.
Is that the Pomodoro tactic? 20 minutes?
Exactly. Uh-huh. Sort of. Yeah. But one thing that I did additionally, besides just setting up a half hour, 25-minute block, is I started to time how long it takes me to go through emails. And in doing that, I realized that going through emails, like there's usually a couple of emails that I can get stuck on, where you end up, those are the emails where either the thread is really long, or to respond to the email, it takes a whole narrative to really get into the specifics. And I realized that, 80% of my email time was going to it's the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of my email or time in email was going to 20% of my emails. And once I realized that, it really forced me to, one, get very deliberate on when is there an email that I'm going to spend some extra time on. Two, as I'm spending extra time, do I really need to write a novel, or can I keep my response short? And three, if a novel is really required, maybe this is better for a meeting. So that's one thing that's been really helpful. A second tactic, and this is a basic one, but something that I had moved away from that I've come back to, is starting each week before the Monday starts, knowing what I want to accomplish that week. So that means on Sunday, before Monday, checking in with myself, my one-on-one with myself, and saying, hey, Adam, what did you do last week? What worked? What didn't work? What are you going to do next week? What are the nice to haves? What are the must haves? And then every day, doing the same thing again. So starting the day, what am I going to be doing? And then at the end of the day, having a checkout process. Did I get done what I said I was going to do? No. Why not? What's my plan for the next day? And it's such a basic thing, but it's something that so many people don't do. And sometimes it's those basic things where it just takes a bit of, persistence, self-accountability, and consistency to make those things happen. And those little habits, you build on those day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, and then you look back and wow, like all those things that you've accomplished. So, yeah,
I don't know if you heard of TK Cater, who was also the founder of Tout App. He went on to become this. Yeah, went on to become the senior VP of Marketo before it was acquired by Adobe for some $2.4 billion or something. But he was actually a guest, and he mentioned that same habit that you described, which he would start on Sunday evenings, just planning his entire week. So knowing exactly what his week is going to look like, so there was no surprise, and then also much more productive because he already knew what he needed to get done. But I like that end of the day, kind of that reflection of did I get everything done, and actually being true to yourself and say, well, some of the urgent took away from my most important task or my important things, which is usually our biggest problem. Like there's always some fire that comes about that takes you away from some of the important things you need to do. So obviously, knowing what you know today, what advice would you give your younger self of what the younger self should do different?
I think if I could go back and give my younger self some advice, it would be to really tap into myself, listen to myself, and kind of just let life unfold. Not take things too seriously. Make time for all of the different important areas of your life, whether it's, work or fitness or relationships, and to realize that there's no ceiling, that there's always, a wall that you can push through, and if you've got the right motivation and the right why.
Awesome. Well, that's a great point to end the interview on. Adam, I really appreciate you joining me for this episode, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by One IMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.